Before we begin, a quick and important disclaimer. This video discusses historical trends, sociological data, and demographic shifts regarding marriage and divorce in the United States. The information presented is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, or psychological advice. Family law and personal financial impacts vary significantly by state and individual circumstance. Viewers should conduct their own due diligence and consult with qualified professionals, such as attorneys or licensed counselors, before making any major life decisions or interpreting these trends as predictive of their own personal outcomes. For the first time in over a century, the American family isn't just changing. It is being fundamentally restructured under the weight of a phenomenon that historians will likely call the Great Decoupling. While most people believe divorce rates are skyrocketing, the reality is far more complex, far more concentrated, and significantly more revealing about the future of the United States economy and social fabric. We are witnessing a massive demographic split. While younger generations are actually staying together longer than their parents, a silver tsunami of late-life divorces is wiping out the retirement savings of millions of baby boomers. The data tells a story that contradicts almost every headline you see on social media. If you are married, planning to get married, or currently navigating a separation, the historical trends we are uncovering today represent the difference between generational wealth and a total collapse of your personal long-term financial security. By the end of this deep dive masterclass, you will understand exactly why the 50% divorce statistic is a myth, who is actually at risk in the current 2026 landscape, and how the shifts in American demographics over the last 80 years have led us to this specific volatile moment in history. To understand the now trend, we have to look at the wreckage of the 1970s and 80s. For decades, the American public has been fed the narrative that half of all marriages end in failure. This number became a cultural cornerstone, shaping everything from prenuptial agreement laws to the way sitcoms were written. However, that 50% figure was a projection based on the explosive rise of divorce following the introduction of no-fault divorce laws, starting with California in 1969. Before this legislative shift, divorce required grounds, proof of adultery, cruelty, or abandonment. When the legal gates opened, a backlog of decades of unhappy marriages flooded the courts. This created a statistical anomaly that we are only now, in the mid-2020s, beginning to see in its true historical context. The current trend in U.S. history is defined by a massive education gap. Data from the last several years indicates that for college-educated couples, the divorce rate has plummeted, behaving more like the stable trends of the 1950s. Conversely, for those without a four-year degree, the rates remain high and volatile. This isn't just a matter of love or compatibility. It is a matter of socioeconomic insulation. High-earning, highly educated demographics are increasingly using marriage as a capstone event, something you do after your career is established and your debt is managed, rather than a foundation event. This shift has created a two-tier society where marital stability is becoming a luxury good, accessible primarily to those with the financial resources to outsource domestic stress and weather economic downturns. When we look at the specific case study of the Gray divorce movement, the numbers are staggering. Since the 1990s, the divorce rate for Americans over the age of 50 has more than doubled. For those over 65, it has tripled. This is the now trend that is currently reshaping the American landscape. Unlike the divorces of the 1970s, which were often driven by younger couples seeking personal liberation, these late-life splits are driven by longer life expectancies and the changing role of women in the workforce. In 1950, a woman reaching age 60 might have expected another 10 to 15 years of life. Today, that number is closer to 25 or 30. This longevity bonus has changed the math of "till death do us part." Many individuals are looking at a 30-year horizon and deciding that they would rather spend their final 3 decades alone or with a new partner than in a stagnant relationship. However, the historical fallout of this trend is a massive depletion of the U.S.'s collective retirement pool. When a couple divorces at 65, they aren't just splitting an income, they are splitting an infrastructure. 2 households are more expensive than one. Legal fees, the sale of the family home in a volatile housing market, and the division of 401k plans often result in both parties dropping an entire socioeconomic class overnight. We are seeing a surge in silver poverty, particularly among women, who historically have had lower lifetime earnings and smaller social security draws. This demographic shift is forcing a reevaluation of how we view the golden years in America. Then there is the millennial marriage paradox. Contrary to the popular hookup culture narrative, millennials and older Gen Z individuals who do choose to marry are doing so with a level of intentionality that hasn't been seen since the early 20th century. They are waiting longer. The median age for a first marriage is now at an all-time high, and they are vetting partners based on financial compatibility as much as romantic chemistry. This slow marriage movement is a direct reaction to the high divorce era they witnessed as children. They saw the 1980s peak of divorce firsthand, and they are terrified of repeating it. This has led to a historical decline in the raw number of divorces, even as the total population grows. But don't let the declining rate fool you. The intensity and complexity of the divorces that do happen are increasing. Modern divorces in 2026 are no longer just about who gets the house or the dog. They are about the division of complex digital assets, cryptocurrency portfolios, and intellectual property. The demographics of divorce now includes the digital nomad factor, couples who may have lived in 3 different states and 2 different countries during a 5-year marriage, leading to jurisdictional nightmares that didn't exist 20 years ago. The legal system is struggling to keep up with a demographic that moves faster than the laws can be written. Furthermore, we must examine the geography of uncoupling. Historical trends show a stark divide between red state and blue state divorce patterns. States with traditionally conservative values often see higher divorce rates, largely because people in those regions tend to marry much younger. Marrying at 21 significantly increases the statistical probability of divorce compared to marrying at 31. Conversely, in high cost of living urban hubs, the economic lock-in effect is keeping unhappy couples together. In cities like New York, San Francisco, or Austin, the cost of housing is so prohibitive that many couples find it financially impossible to divorce, leading to a rise in socially divorced but cohabitating arrangements. This is a demographic phantom, people who are legally married but functionally separated, skewing the data and hiding the true level of marital dissatisfaction in the U.S. As we peel back the layers of this deep dive, you have to realize that divorce in America is no longer a singular event. It is a trailing indicator of the health of the middle class. When the middle class is squeezed, the pressure manifests in the home. Every historical spike in the divorce rate over the last century, the post-World War II spike, the 1970s surge, and the post-2020 fluctuations, can be tied back to shifts in labor, gender roles, and economic mobility. We aren't just looking at the end of relationships. We are looking at the evolution of the American dream itself. Over the next 9 parts of this masterclass, we are going to break down the specific data points of each age bracket, the hidden costs that the legal industry doesn't want you to know, and the step-by-step evolution of how we arrived at this pivotal moment in U.S. history. This is the reality of the American family in 2026. It is smaller, older, more educated, and more precarious than ever before. To understand the current landscape of 2026, we have to look at the primary engine driving these demographic shifts: the massive transfer of risk from the state and corporations onto the individual family unit. In the mid-20th century, the American marriage was buttressed by external stability, pensions, a reliable housing market, and a singular career path. Today, the demographic data shows that marriage has transitioned from a social requirement to a high-stakes financial partnership. This is where we meet our first case study of the modern era, a couple we will call Mark and Sarah, living in a suburban tech hub in 2026. Mark is a specialized project manager and Sarah is a healthcare administrator. On paper, they represent the peak of the American middle class. However, their demographic profile puts them in the highest risk category for what sociologists call the middle class trap. Imagine if you spent 15 years building a shared life, only to find that the very assets that were supposed to provide security, the 4-bedroom home and the diversified investment accounts, became the primary barriers to a clean break. In 2026, we are seeing a trend where the complexity of the marital estate is actually delaying the legal filing of divorce, even while the emotional separation has already occurred. For Mark and Sarah, the historical trend suggests that if they had lived in 1980, their divorce would have been relatively straightforward. Sell the house, split the equity, and move into smaller, affordable apartments. But in 2026, with interest rates remaining stubborn and the cost of inventory at historic highs, neither can afford to buy the other out, and neither can afford to qualify for a new mortgage on a single income. This is the housing lock-in demographic. It is a group of thousands of Americans who are functionally separated, but legally bound because the market has made the cost of uncoupling prohibitive. This leads us to a deeper dive into the educational divide we touched on earlier. Historically, the U.S. saw a bell curve in divorce rates across all education levels. That bell curve has flattened into a sharp cliff. If we look at the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics and recent sociological surveys in 2026, the potential outcomes for a marriage where both partners hold a master's degree or higher are radically different from those where the highest level of education is a high school diploma. For the highly educated, divorce is a controlled descent. For the less educated, it is often a free fall. The step-by-step reason for this is the professionalization of the household. High-earning couples are increasingly viewing their marriage through the lens of a corporate merger. They employ accountants, use shared digital budgeting tools, and have a clear understanding of the tax implications of their filing status. This isn't just about having more money. It is about having more data. Consider the role of debt in the 2026 divorce trend. Student loan debt has reached a point where it is no longer just an individual burden, but a marital contagion. In many U.S. jurisdictions, debt acquired during the marriage is considered marital property, regardless of whose name is on the degree. We are seeing a demographic shift where younger couples, particularly those in the 28 to 35 age bracket, are citing student debt as a top 3 reason for marital friction. The historical trend here is fascinating. In the 1960s, a couple might argue about overspending on a credit card. In 2026, they are arguing about a 6-figure liability that was brought into the marriage as a prerequisite for entry into the middle class. This creates a psychological weight that historical data shows leads to a higher probability of dissolution within the first 7 years. Now, let us look at the shift in gender demographics within the divorce courts. For decades, the narrative was that women were the primary initiators of divorce because of emotional dissatisfaction. While that remains a factor, the 2026 data shows a surge in what we call the breadwinner pivot. As of this year, a significant percentage of American households feature a female primary earner. This has fundamentally upended the traditional alimony and child support structures that were designed in an era when the male was the sole provider. The historical trends show that legal systems are incredibly slow to adapt. We are seeing case studies where women are now the ones paying spousal support, a concept that was statistically rare just 40 years ago. This shift is causing a re-evaluation of prenuptial agreements among young professional women, who are now the ones seeking to protect assets they brought into the union. Step by step, the process of divorce in 2026 has also been revolutionized by the emergence of the gray divorce. Let us look at another scenario. Imagine a couple, Robert and Elaine, who are both 67 years old. They have been married for 40 years. Their children are gone, their mortgage is paid off, and they are entering the era of maximum leisure. In the 1950s, the idea of these two uncoupling would have been a scandal that defined a community. In 2026, it is a standard Tuesday in family court. The demographic data shows that for people over 65, the stigma of divorce has almost entirely vanished, replaced by a philosophy of individual fulfillment. But the financial reality for Robert and Elaine is a cautionary tale. In 1990, splitting a pension was a math problem. In 2026, splitting a portfolio that includes a primary residence, a vacation rental property, and multiple retirement vehicles, while facing the rising costs of healthcare, is a catastrophic economic event. This demographic is increasingly finding that while they have the social freedom to leave, they no longer have the time to recover from the financial hit. The historical context of the now trend also requires us to examine the rise of the no-children marriage. In 2026, a record number of U.S. couples are choosing to remain child-free. Demographically, this group has the highest divorce rate but the lowest legal complexity. Without the glue of children or the legal entanglement of custody battles, these marriages are becoming more fluid. We are moving toward a historical model that looks less like a lifelong contract and more like a renewable lease. This leasehold marriage trend is especially prevalent in urban centers where the social network replaces the family network. If there are no kids and no shared real estate, the barrier to exit is low. This is contributing to a statistical volatility, where the number of divorces stays high even as the population of married people fluctuates. But there is a hidden layer to this data that no one is talking about: the impact of the gig economy on marital stability. In 2026, a significant portion of the U.S. workforce does not have a stable 9-to-5 income. They are consultants, freelancers, and platform workers. Historically, the family was the unit that provided health insurance and stability through a partner's employer-sponsored plan. As that disappears, the stress on the marriage increases. When both partners are navigating the volatility of the 2026 labor market, the home becomes a pressure cooker rather than a sanctuary. Case studies show that the lack of a stabilizer partner someone with a boring, predictable job, is a leading indicator of marital stress in the current decade. This brings us to a critical realization. The demographics of divorce in U.S. history are not just a collection of sad stories. They are a map of where the country is going. We are moving toward a future where marriage is a specialized, high-performance vehicle for the elite, while the rest of the population navigates a more fragmented, individualistic social structure. The trends we are seeing in 2026 are the first clear signals of a post-nuclear family era. But if the demographics are shifting this rapidly, what does it mean for the next generation? How will the children of the 2026 gray divorce and the housing lock-in couples view the institution of marriage themselves? And more importantly, what is the one factor that is currently predicting the survival of a marriage more accurately than income, education, or age? As we move into part 3, we are going to look at the wealth gap within divorce, the terrifying reality of how a single legal filing can move a family from the top 10% of earners to the bottom 50% in less than 12 months. We will examine the specific states where the laws have been changed to favor one demographic over another, and we will uncover the invisible assets that are being fought over in modern courts. Assets you might own right now without even realizing their value in a separation. The data is about to get much more personal. To understand the current economic bifurcation of the American family in 2026, we must address the wealth gap that has turned the divorce court into a zero-sum arena of financial survival. Historically, divorce was viewed as a social tragedy. Today, in the context of the U.S. economy, it is increasingly analyzed as a massive involuntary redistribution of capital. When a household splits, the immediate potential outcomes often include a 30 to 40% drop in the standard of living for the lower-earning spouse, typically within the first 12 months. This is not just a temporary dip. For many, it is a permanent downward shift in their demographic trajectory. Imagine a character named David, a mid-level marketing executive in Columbus, Ohio. In early 2026, David and his spouse decide to end their 12-year marriage. They have a combined household income of $180,000. In their married state, they could afford a mortgage in a top-tier school district, 2 reliable vehicles, and annual contributions to their retirement accounts. Step by step, the math of their separation begins to dismantle that reality. First, the $450,000 in home equity is split. However, because mortgage rates for new purchases in 2026 remain significantly higher than their original 3% rate from years ago, neither David nor his ex-spouse can afford a comparable home on their individual portions of that equity. They are forced from the tier of homeowners into the volatile rental market, where prices have outpaced wage growth for nearly a decade. This is the wealth gap in action. The data suggests that for the top 10% of earners, divorce is a manageable hurdle involving the reshuffling of diversified assets. But for the middle 50%, the Divorce Act itself is the primary driver of wealth destruction. We are seeing a historical trend where the legal fees alone, which in complex 2026 cases can easily exceed $25,000 per person, consume the very liquid savings intended for a child's college fund or a down payment on a post-divorce residence. This creates a demographic of the newly poor, individuals who possess high-value professional skills but zero liquid net worth due to the transactional costs of uncoupling. Beyond the obvious bank accounts and real estate, we are witnessing the rise of invisible assets. In 2026, the battleground has shifted to things you cannot touch. Case studies from recent filings in states like Florida and Texas show a surge in litigation over the valuation of digital storefronts, social media influence, and even data privacy rights. Imagine if a spouse spent 5 years building a side hustle as a content creator or an e-commerce reseller. While the physical inventory might be negligible, the brand equity, the follower list, and the recurring algorithm-driven revenue are now considered marital property subject to appraisal. These are assets that many people don't even list on a prenuptial agreement because, 5 years ago, they didn't exist or had no measurable value. The historical trend of the invisible asset also extends to the professional degree and the enhanced earning capacity argument. In 2026, we are seeing more aggressive use of forensic accountants to value the future potential earnings of a spouse who was supported through medical or law school. If one partner worked a retail job to pay for the other's specialized certification, the court may view that certification as a marital investment. This leads to a complex step-by-step valuation where a percentage of a person's future labor is essentially liened by their former partner. This is a radical departure from the 20th century model and represents a deepening of the legal entanglement between individuals. Let us look at the specific geography of these trends. In 2026, Your zip code might be the single biggest factor in your post-divorce financial health. We are seeing a demographic migration where individuals are moving across state lines specifically to file for divorce in jurisdictions with more favorable alimony or property division laws. For example, some states have recently moved toward a rehabilitative alimony model, which provides support only for a short period to allow a spouse to gain job skills, whereas other states still lean toward permanent alimony for long-term marriages. This has created a phenomenon of the divorce refugee, people who delay their filing until they have established residency in a state that will protect their retirement or business interests. The wealth gap is also being exacerbated by the 2026 tax landscape. Historically, alimony was tax-deductible for the payer and taxable for the recipient. The reversal of this rule in recent years has meant that the divorce dollar no longer stretches as far. The federal government now takes a larger cut of the support payments, leaving less for the actual maintenance of two households. This is a silent demographic drain that is pushing more divorced households toward the federal poverty line. When you combine high inflation, the loss of tax advantages, and the cost of maintaining separate lives, the math of the 1990s simply does not apply to the reality of 2026. Now, consider the inheritance factor. We are currently in the middle of the great wealth transfer, where trillions of dollars are passing from the silent generation and the boomers to their heirs. In 2026, this is creating a massive spike in divorce litigation. While inheritances are generally considered separate property in the US, the trend of commingling is catching thousands of people off guard. If David in our previous example uses $50,000 of an inheritance to pay down the mortgage on the marital home or to renovate the kitchen, that separate asset has now been commingled and, in many jurisdictions, becomes marital property. The demographic of people losing their family legacy through simple accounting errors is growing every year. This leads to the potential outcome of the modern prenup. In 2026, prenuptial agreements are no longer just for the wealthy. They have become a standard demographic tool for anyone with a student loan, a pet, or a social media account. We are seeing a trend where even couples with modest means are using lifestyle clauses to govern everything from future social media posts about the divorce to the division of frequent flyer miles. This is the professionalization of intimacy. It is a step-by-step attempt to bypass the high-cost, high-risk legal system by creating a private contract. But as the data shows, these contracts are being challenged in court at record rates, leading to even higher legal costs for those who thought they were protected. The deep dive into 2026 demographics shows us that the American family is not just breaking. It is being reclassified by the legal and financial systems. The wealth gap is creating a society where the ability to leave an unhappy marriage is becoming a financial privilege. If you lack the assets to fund a legal battle or the income to support two households, you are increasingly forced into economic cohabitation, staying together not for love, but for the avoidance of total financial ruin. But there is a darker, more hidden trend emerging in the data. It involves the way artificial intelligence is now being used in divorce proceedings to predict settlement outcomes and even to score parental fitness. As we move into Part 4, we are going to look at the algorithm divorce, how big data is replacing the judge's gavel, and why your search history from 3 years ago might be the most valuable piece of evidence in your future custody battle. We will examine the specific companies that are now insuring marriages against divorce, and why the U.S. insurance industry is betting on your relationship failing. The intersection of technology and the end of marriage is where the story gets truly dystopian. The transition into the era of the algorithm divorce in 2026 has been swift and largely silent. While we have focused on the financial and social aspects of uncoupling, a technological layer has integrated itself into the very fabric of the U.S. legal system. Imagine a character named Michael, an engineer in Seattle. Michael is going through a contested custody battle. In a previous decade, his case would have relied on character witnesses, deposition testimony, and the subjective observation of a court-appointed evaluator. In 2026, the court is looking at his digital footprint. Every late-night rideshare receipt, every search query about high-stress work environments, and every minute spent on a mobile gaming application is being fed into predictive modeling software. This is the reality of predictive analytics in family law. We are seeing a demographic shift where the legal outcomes of a divorce are being determined by large language models and sentiment analysis tools before a human judge even reviews the file. Step by step, the process looks like this. Legal tech firms ingest millions of pages of past judicial rulings, then they map those rulings against the digital behavior of the current litigants. If the data shows that people with Michael's specific browsing habits or spending patterns are historically less likely to provide a stable home environment, the software generates a risk score. This is not a guess. It is a statistical probability that influences the settlement offers and the tactical decisions made by attorneys. The historical trend here is the movement from evidence to data. In the past, you had to prove a specific event occurred. Now you have to defend against a pattern of behavior that an algorithm deems suboptimal. For the demographic of high-earning tech workers or people with extensive online presences, this is a minefield. We are seeing case studies where a spouse's subscription history to certain podcasts, or their participation in specific online forums, is used as proxy evidence for their psychological state. It creates a landscape where your privacy and your parental rights are inextricably linked to your digital hygiene. Furthermore, we must discuss the emergence of marriage insurance. In 2026, the insurance industry has identified the volatility of the American family as a massive market opportunity. We are seeing historical trends where companies are offering supplemental policies that trigger a payout in the event of a legal separation. These are not get-rich-overnight schemes. They are structured like long-term disability or business interruption insurance. For a monthly premium, a couple can ensure that the legal fees and the cost of establishing a second household are covered. But there is a catch. To maintain the policy, some insurers require the couple to share data from their smart home devices or shared financial apps to monitor the health of the relationship. Imagine if your insurance premium spiked because an AI detected an increase in the frequency of elevated voices in your kitchen or a decrease in shared spending at grocery stores. This is the surveillance marriage. By 2026, the demographic of data-conscious couples is already opting into these systems to mitigate the financial risk of divorce, effectively turning their private lives into a performance for a corporate risk assessor. The potential outcomes are clear. We are trading privacy for a financial safety net, and in doing so, we are providing the very data that will eventually be used to litigate the end of the marriage. Let us dive deeper into the specific demographic of the gig economy divorce. We touched on this in part 2, but the technological aspect in 2026 is far more granular. For the millions of Americans working through platforms, their income is often managed by an algorithm that determines their hours and their pay based on demand. When this person enters a divorce court, how do you calculate future child support or alimony? Historically, you looked at the last 3 years of tax returns. In 2026, attorneys are demanding access to the platform's back-end data to argue that the individual has the potential to earn more if they just accepted more gigs. This is the professional capacity trap. It is affecting a demographic of workers who value flexibility, only to find that in a divorce, that flexibility is weaponized against them. The court may impute an income based on what the algorithm says they could have made, rather than what they actually brought home. This leads to a situation where a divorced gig worker is legally obligated to work 80 hours a week just to meet a support payment that was calculated by a machine. This is a step-by-step erosion of the work-life balance that the modern economy was supposed to provide. We are also seeing a shift in how assets are discovered. The days of hiding a bank account in a different town are over. In 2026, forensic blockchain analysis is a standard part of the divorce process for the middle-class demographic. Even if a spouse thinks they have successfully hidden value in a digital wallet or a decentralized finance protocol, the now trend is for specialized firms to track the on-ramps and off-ramps, the moments where fiat currency was converted into digital assets. The demographic of people who thought they could bypass the 50-50 split of marital assets through technology are finding that the law has caught up with the tech. But perhaps the most significant demographic shift in 2026 is the rise of the AI mediator. For a large portion of the U.S. population who cannot afford the $400 an hour fees of a human attorney, they are turning to automated platforms to handle their entire divorce. These platforms use a step-by-step wizard to divide assets, draft parenting plans, and file the paperwork with the county. While this increases access to the legal system, it also standardizes the American family. These algorithms favor the average outcome. If your family doesn't fit the data model of a standard 2026 household, perhaps you have a multi-generational home or a complex co-parenting arrangement with non-relatives, the AI often struggles to provide a fair solution. This is creating a demographic of algorithmically disadvantaged families who are pushed into cookie-cutter legal structures that don't reflect their lived reality. The historical data shows that whenever we automate a social process, we bake in the biases of the era in which the software was written. The divorce software of 2026 is built on the data of the early 2020s, an era of extreme economic and social turbulence. We are essentially forcing the families of the future to live by the rules of the past, as interpreted by a machine. This is the intersection of technology and the end of marriage, a world where your heartbreak is a data point, and your future is a probability. As we look at the demographics of divorce in U.S. history, we see that the 2026 trend is moving away from human empathy and toward cold efficiency. But what happens when that efficiency collides with the most emotional aspect of the human experience? How is the psychological demographic of the U.S. changing as a result of these automated splits? And what is the social credit score for parents that is secretly being developed by private firms to predict which households are most likely to result in a divorce filing? In Part 5, we are going to look at the children of the trend, the demographic of minors growing up in a world where their parents' relationship was managed by an app and ended by an algorithm. We will examine the long-term historical impact on the next generation's ability to form stable bonds, and we will reveal the second divorce phenomenon, the surge in adult children of divorce who are now uncoupling at even higher rates than their parents, creating a feedback loop that is threatening to break the U.S. census models entirely. The generational ripple effect is just beginning. The generational ripple effect is fundamentally altering the demographic landscape of the American family in 2026. To understand the future of the United States, we must look at the children who were raised in the shadow of the great divorce surges of the late 20th and early 21st centuries. We are now seeing a historical trend where the children of divorce are entering their own peak marriage years, but they are doing so with a psychological and financial blueprint that is radically different from their parents'. This has given rise to the intergenerational divorce cycle, a phenomenon where the probability of a relationship ending is significantly higher if both partners come from fractured households. Imagine a character named Chloe, a 30-year-old software designer in Austin, Texas. Chloe grew up in the early 2000s, watching her parents navigate a high-conflict separation that lasted 5 years and consumed a significant portion of her family's wealth. In 2026, Chloe is in a long-term committed relationship, but she refuses to legally marry. Step by step, her decision is driven by a demographic survival instinct. She has seen the potential outcomes of a legal contract that can be weaponized in a courtroom. For Chloe's demographic, the millennial and Gen Z adult children of divorce, the historical trend is a pivot toward commitment without contract. They are choosing cohabitation, shared property agreements, and even joint parenting, but they are opting out of the state-sanctioned marriage certificate. The data from 2026 shows that this isn't just a personal choice. It is a demographic shift that is breaking the traditional U.S. census models. For decades, the government used marriage rates to predict household stability, tax revenue, and school district needs. But as this shadow demographic of committed but unmarried couples grows, the old metrics are becoming obsolete. We are seeing a historical trend where the lack of a formal marriage license among adult children of divorce is actually creating a more stable, albeit less legally protected, family structure. Because the barrier to entry is higher and the exit is less clearly defined by a judge, these couples are often more intentional about their partnerships. However, for those who do choose to marry, the second divorce phenomenon is a growing concern in the 2026 landscape. This refers to the demographic of adult children of divorce who marry and then uncouple at a rate that is nearly double the national average. The step-by-step reason for this, according to recent sociological case studies, is the lack of a conflict resolution template. When a couple hits a major hurdle, be it financial stress, health issues, or career shifts, those who grew up in divorced households are statistically more likely to view exit as the only viable solution. They have been conditioned to believe that relationships are fragile, and that self-preservation is the ultimate priority. This leads us to a deep dive into the gray divorce impact on adult children. This is a trend that is uniquely prominent in 2026. While we often think of divorce as an issue for young children, the surge in couples over 65 uncoupling is creating a crisis for their 30 and 40-year-old offspring. Imagine if you are 38, raising your own kids, and suddenly you have to manage the liquidation of your parents' estate because they are splitting up after 40 years. The demographic data shows that this lateral stress is a major driver of marital friction for the middle-aged demographic. They are caught in a squeeze play, managing their own careers and children while simultaneously acting as emotional and financial advisors to their divorcing parents. The historical impact on generational wealth is perhaps the most devastating aspect of this trend. In the U.S., the primary vehicle for wealth transfer has always been the family home and the joint retirement account. When a divorce occurs, whether in the first 5 years or the 50th, that wealth is diluted by legal fees, tax penalties, and the sheer cost of maintaining two separate lives. By 2026, we are seeing a demographic of young adults who will inherit significantly less than their peers whose parents remain together. This is creating a divorce wealth gap that will persist for decades. Case studies show that a child of a stable marriage has a 40% higher chance of receiving a down payment gift for their own first home compared to a child whose parents divorced in their late 50s. Furthermore, we must examine the psychological demographic of the 2026 household. We are seeing a surge in hyper-independence among the youth. Because they saw their parents' social and financial networks collapse during a divorce, many young Americans are prioritizing individual career security over collective family security. They are investing in self-insurance, building solo investment portfolios, maintaining separate bank accounts even when married, and prioritizing geographic mobility over community roots. This trend is shifting the U.S. population away from stable, multi-generational communities and toward a more transient, individualistic society. Step by step, the 2026 legal system is also adapting to this demographic reality. We are seeing the introduction of parenting coordinators, who are essentially professional mediators for adult children of divorce. These are individuals hired to handle the holidays, the birthdays, and the care of aging parents to prevent the conflict of the original divorce from spilling into the next generation. This is the professionalization of the family unit. We are outsourcing the emotional labor of being a family because the demographic data shows that we are no longer equipped to handle it internally. The now trend in U.S. history is a feedback loop. The more common divorce becomes, the more the next generation views it as an inevitable part of the life cycle. This normalization has led to a demographic of relationship realists. They don't talk about soulmates, they talk about alignment, risk mitigation, and asset protection. While this sounds cold, it is a direct response to the historical volatility they witnessed. The demographic data suggests that while the raw number of divorces might be leveling off in 2026, the complexity of the relationships that remain is higher than ever before. But as the family structure continues to fragment, a new question emerges. Who fills the void? If the nuclear family is no longer the primary unit of American stability, what takes its place? In the vacuum left by the declining marriage rate and the rising divorce rate among the elderly, we are seeing the rise of intentional communities and platonic partnerships. This is a demographic that is redefining what it means to be a household in the United States. As we move into Part 6, we are going to look at the rise of the platonic household, the demographic of people who are choosing to raise children and share assets with friends rather than romantic partners. We will examine the legal challenges these co-parenting arrangements face in 2026 and why the U.S. tax code is currently the biggest obstacle to this new American family model. We will also reveal the divorce economy, the specific industries that are currently booming because of the fragmentation of the American home, from modular housing to single-serving subscription services. The business of being alone has never been more profitable. The profitability of the fragmented home has led to the rise of the divorce economy, a sector of the U.S. market that is currently outperforming traditional family-oriented retail. In 2026, the demographic of the newly single is no longer seen as a transient state between marriages, but as a permanent high-value consumer class. This has given birth to the single-serving economy. Historically, the American grocery store and housing market were designed for the bulk-buying nuclear family. Today, step by step, we are seeing those industries pivot to accommodate the one-person household. Imagine a character named James, a 42-year-old mid-career professional in Charlotte, North Carolina. James is recently divorced. In the 1990s, James would have struggled to find a living situation that didn't involve a sprawling suburban home or a cramped studio apartment. In 2026, he is the target demographic for the modular living movement. Companies are now mass-producing luxury micro-units that can be expanded or contracted based on custody schedules. These homes feature flexible wall systems. When James has his children on weekends, the unit opens up to provide 3 bedrooms. When he is alone during the week, he can lease the extra space back to a central management company or use it as a high-end office. This isn't just about architecture. It is about the demographic reality that the modern U.S. worker needs a home that can physically adapt to the volatility of their family life. The potential outcomes for businesses that ignore this shift are becoming clear. We are seeing a decline in traditional big-box stores that focus on large quantity packaging, replaced by hyper-curated, single-serving subscription services. In 2026, Everything from laundry detergent to high-end meal kits is being portioned for the individual. The historical trend shows that the single tax, the idea that it costs more to live alone, is being mitigated by companies that have realized that 30% of the US population now lives in a single-person household. This demographic is willing to pay a premium for convenience and the reduction of waste, creating a multi-billion-dollar niche that thrives on household fragmentation. But the most fascinating demographic pivot in 2026 is the rise of the platonic household. This is where the script of US history takes a sharp turn. We are seeing a surge in what sociologists call co-parenting by choice. Imagine two friends, Sarah and Maria. They have no romantic interest in each other, but they both want to raise children and build equity in a home. In 2026, they represent a growing demographic that is bypassing traditional marriage altogether. They enter into a legal partnership agreement that mirrors a business contract more than a marriage license. This allows them to pool their resources, secure a better mortgage, and provide a stable two-adult home for their children without the risk of a messy emotional divorce. However, the historical barriers to this model are significant. The U.S. tax code, which was largely written in the mid-20th century, is currently the biggest obstacle for the platonic household. As of 2026, these pairs cannot file joint tax returns, they often face higher gift taxes when transferring assets to each other, and they lack the automatic inheritance rights granted to married couples. This has led to a booming legal industry focused on family tech law, where attorneys create complex networks of LLCs and trusts to mimic the benefits of marriage for non-traditional households. This demographic is literally hacking the legal system to create a new version of the American family. Step by step, this shift is also impacting the inheritance and estate demographics of the United States. Historically, wealth was passed down through the bloodline or the marital bond. In the 2026 landscape of platonic households and multi-layered families, the who gets what question has become a logistical nightmare. We are seeing a rise in death mediation, where individuals prepare for their passing by navigating the competing interests of former spouses, platonic partners, and children from multiple unions. The demographic data suggests that the next 20 years will see a record amount of litigation over estates precisely because the American family has become so decentralized. Consider the social credit of the individual in this new economy. In 2026, your marital status is no longer a binary choice on a form. It is a spectrum. Lenders and insurance companies are beginning to look at the stability of your social pod. If you are a single person living alone, you are considered a higher risk than a single person living in a stable, multi-adult platonic household. This is a historical shift back toward communal living, but with a modern high-tech twist. We are seeing the emergence of co-living apps that use AI to match individuals based on financial compatibility and lifestyle habits, essentially acting as a Tinder for roommates who want to build a shared financial future without the romance. The demographics of divorce now trend toward a world where the one is replaced by the many. The idea that a single person can provide for all of your emotional, financial, and child-rearing needs is being rejected by a generation that saw that model fail their parents. This has created a surge in the loneliness industry. Companies that sell community and connection to a demographic that is increasingly living in silos. From friendship concierges to luxury adult dormitories, the business of filling the void left by the traditional family is one of the fastest-growing sectors in the 2026 U.S. economy. Furthermore, we must examine the corporate demographic. In 2026, major U.S. employers are beginning to offer relationship benefits that extend beyond the traditional spouse. We are seeing case studies where companies allow employees to add a designated life partner, be it a sibling, a parent, or a platonic friend, to their health insurance and retirement benefits. This is a direct response to the demographic data, showing that the number of married employees is shrinking. To attract and retain talent in a post-marriage world, corporations are being forced to redefine what family means in their HR manuals. As we look at these trends, it becomes clear that the fragmentation of the American home is not just a social crisis. It is an economic evolution. The divorce economy of 2026 is robust because it serves the needs of a population that is increasingly mobile, individualistic, and skeptical of lifelong institutions. But if we are moving toward a world of modular homes, platonic co-parenting, and AI-matched roommates, what happens to the concept of the home as a sanctuary? How is the psychological demographic of the U.S. shifting as we move from roots to nodes? In Part 7, we are going to dive into the psychology of the permanent single, the demographic of Americans who have decided to never marry or cohabitate again. We will examine the data on solo parenting by choice and the shocking rise of the single-person political bloc. We are about to uncover how this group is beginning to sway U.S. elections by demanding policies that favor the individual over the family unit, from single-payer healthcare to the abolition of the marriage penalty in the tax code. The political landscape is about to be rewritten by the very people the system was designed to ignore. The rise of the single-person political bloc in 2026 is perhaps the most overlooked demographic disruption in modern U.S. history. For over 2 centuries, the American political machine was built on the foundation of the family unit. Tax breaks, zoning laws, and healthcare subsidies were all engineered to incentivize and protect the nuclear family. But as we navigate through 2026, the data shows that the number of single adult households has surpassed the number of traditional married with children households in several key swing states. This shift is turning the once ignored single voter into the most powerful kingmaker in the U.S. electoral system. Imagine a character named Linda, a 54-year-old nurse in Phoenix, Arizona. Linda went through a gray divorce 3 years ago and has no intention of remarrying. In the past, Linda might have voted based on education bonds for her children or family-focused economic policies. But in 2026, Linda's political priorities have shifted toward individual survival. She is part of a demographic that is demanding a total overhaul of the American social contract. Step by step, this group is pushing for the abolition of the marriage penalty, a historical tax quirk where dual-income married couples often pay more in taxes than they would as 2 single filers. For Linda, every dollar counts as she tries to rebuild her retirement nest egg solo. Historical trends indicate that political parties are scrambling to adapt. We are seeing the emergence of the solo voter platform. This isn't just about social issues. It is about the raw economics of being alone in a system designed for 2. Case studies of local elections in 2025 and early 2026 show that candidates who focus on single-payer healthcare, affordable microhousing, and expanded social safety nets for those without a domestic partner are winning by significant margins. The single-person household is no longer a fringe demographic. It is a massive, motivated voting bloc that views the government as the ultimate safety net in the absence of a spouse. This brings us to the shocking rise of solo parenting by choice. Historically, the demographic of single parents was largely defined by divorce or unplanned circumstances. In 2026, we are seeing a historical pivot where high-earning professionals are choosing to become parents without ever seeking a partner. Through advancements in reproductive technology and a social landscape that has destigmatized the non-traditional home, this demographic is growing. These parents are often highly educated and politically active, and they are demanding that the workplace and the law treat their one-parent household with the same reverence as the traditional model. Imagine the potential outcomes if this demographic succeeds in decoupling social benefits from marital status. We are talking about a world where health insurance is no longer a family plan but an individual right, where the concept of a dependent is redefined, and where the inheritance laws that have governed the U.S. for 250 years are stripped of their spousal preference. This is a radical departure from the American tradition of blood and marriage being the primary conduits of wealth and care. But as this group gains political power, they are also facing a massive psychological shift. The demographic of the permanent single is reinventing the concept of the third place. Historically, after work, Americans went home to their families. In 2026, with no one waiting at home, the demand for communal spaces, gyms, co-working hubs, and hobby-based clubs has skyrocketed. We are seeing a historical trend where the commercial real estate market is being reshaped by people who would rather spend 4 hours in a high-end social club than 40 minutes in a lonely living room. This is the psychology of the node. People no longer want to be rooted in a house, they want to be connected to a network. Consider the case study of a town in Colorado that recently rezoned its entire residential district to allow for common house developments. These are tiny, private living quarters centered around massive, shared kitchens and social areas. This was a direct response to the demographic data, showing that 40% of the town's residents were single and struggling with the isolation of traditional suburban life. In 2026, these developments are the most sought-after real estate in the region. They offer the privacy of a single life with the social infrastructure of a family. This is the new American neighborhood. However, the now trend also has a darker side: the rise of the single-person poverty trap. While the high-earning permanent single can afford these luxury social nodes, the lower-income demographic is being pushed into extreme isolation. Without a second income to buffer against inflation or a partner to provide care during an illness, a single person in the 2026 economy is one emergency away from total collapse. This is why the political demands of this bloc are so intense. They aren't just voting for lower taxes. They are voting for their own survival in a world that has become increasingly expensive to navigate alone. Step by step, the 2026 data reveals that we are moving toward a bachelor economy. This isn't just for young people. The fastest growing segment of the single population is women over the age of 60. These women, many of whom are survivors of the gray divorce wave, are becoming a formidable force in the U.S. housing and healthcare markets. They are choosing to live in Golden Girls-style arrangements, platonic, shared households that provide mutual support and pooled resources. This demographic is rejecting the nursing home model in favor of intentional, peer-led communities. They are rewriting the rules of aging in America. As we look at the political and social power of the single voter, we have to ask, what happens to the concept of the national identity? For most of U.S. history, the American dream was pictured as a family in a house with a white picket fence. In 2026, that image is being replaced by an individual with a high-speed internet connection, a flexible job, and a diverse network of platonic connections. The demographic shift is complete. The individual, not the family, is now the primary unit of American life. But if the individual is the new foundation, how do we handle the most vulnerable members of society? How does a single-person political bloc deal with the reality of child rearing and elder care, when the traditional family support systems have been dismantled? The answers are being written in real time in the courts and the halls of Congress. We are witnessing the birth of a new social contract, and the stakes could not be higher. In Part 8, we are going to dive into the divorce of the state, how different regions of the U.S. are literally splitting their laws to cater to these new demographics. We will examine the family law sanctuaries, where divorce is streamlined to under 30 days, and the traditionalist strongholds, where the legal system is making it harder than ever to uncouple. We will reveal the secret data on how your location is being used to predict not just if you will get divorced, but how much of your wealth you will be allowed to keep. The map of the U.S. is being redrawn by the divorce courts. The map of the United States in 2026 is no longer just a collection of state borders. It has become a fragmented landscape of legal jurisdictions where your physical location determines your financial destiny. We are entering the era of the divorce of the state, where a move of just 50 miles across a state line can be the difference between retaining your entire inheritance or losing half of your lifetime earnings. This geographic lottery is the most aggressive demographic driver of 2026, creating a new class of strategic migrants, the jurisdiction shoppers. Imagine a character named Michael, a high-level executive in the aerospace industry. Michael has spent 20 years building a substantial portfolio of stocks, real estate, and a specialized pension. In early 2026, Michael and his spouse, who live in a community property state like California or Nevada, decide to separate. Under the historical trends of these jurisdictions, the law is clear. Every dollar earned and every asset acquired during the marriage is owned 50/50. There is no nuance, there is only the math of the split. For Michael, the potential outcome is a massive, immediate liquidation of his life's work. But imagine if Michael had established residency in a state that follows equitable distribution, such as New York or North Carolina. In these jurisdictions, the court does not start at 50/50. Instead, it looks at a dozen factors: the length of the marriage, the health of the parties, and crucially, the individual contribution of each spouse to the acquisition of that wealth. Step by step, the 2026 legal battle in an equitable distribution state is a narrative fight, not just a mathematical one. Michael's attorney would argue that his specialized skills and premarital foundation entitle him to a 60 or 70% share. This demographic of high-asset individuals is now moving their primary residences years before a divorce is even on the horizon, specifically to position themselves in favorable legal territory. Plus 2. This has led to the rise of family law sanctuaries. In 2026, states like Alaska, South Dakota, and Washington have become the go-to destinations for the fast-track divorce. Imagine a scenario where you can move to a state on a Monday and file for divorce by Tuesday. These states have zero or minimal residency requirements, allowing couples to bypass the year-long, cooling-off periods required in traditionalist strongholds like South Carolina or Maryland. The demographic data shows a surge in divorce tourism, where couples rent apartments in these fast-track states solely to take advantage of their streamlined statutes. It is a historical pivot toward divorce as a consumer product: fast, efficient, and legally frictionless. Conversely, we are seeing the emergence of traditionalist strongholds. In 2026, several states are moving in the opposite direction, introducing legislation to revisit no-fault divorce laws. These regions are attempting to reintroduce fault-based grounds, like infidelity or abandonment, as a way to protect the wronged spouse during the division of assets. For the demographic living in these areas, divorce is becoming more difficult, more expensive, and more adversarial. This creates a fascinating demographic split. In half of the country, divorce is a clinical administrative process, while in the other half, it is returning to a moral and financial reckoning. The now trend in U.S. history is also being shaped by the digital asset divide. In 2026, jurisdictions are split on how to handle the invisible wealth we discussed in Part 3. Some states have passed specific 2026 statutes that treat cryptocurrency and digital intellectual property as speculative, and therefore separate from the marital estate unless commingled. Other states view these as standard marital assets. Case studies show that a spouse with a large Bitcoin holding or a high-value social media brand will fight tooth and nail to keep their case in a state that doesn't yet have the infrastructure to value these assets accurately. The technological literacy of a local court has become a primary factor in a spouse's legal strategy. Step by step, the 2026 divorce process also varies wildly based on how a state handles gray divorce alimony. In the Northeast, we are seeing a trend toward capping the duration of spousal support, often limiting it to half the length of the marriage. In the South, however, permanent alimony for long-term marriages remains a common potential outcome. For a 65-year-old woman in 2026, her retirement security is entirely dependent on whether her case is heard in a state that prioritizes rehabilitation or maintenance. This demographic is literally being split into those who can afford to age with dignity and those who are forced back into the labor market at 70 because their state laws favor the payer. But there is a hidden data point that is redrawing the map even further: the rise of private judging. In wealthy enclaves from Malibu to Palm Beach, the elite demographic is opting out of the public court system entirely. They are hiring retired judges to hear their cases in private office buildings, ensuring that their financial skeletons stay out of the public record. In 2026, this has created a two-tiered justice system. The public demographics are left to fight in overcrowded, underfunded county courts, while the top 1% buy a custom divorce that is faster, more private, and more predictable. This is the ultimate fragmentation of the American legal experience. The historical impact of this jurisdictional chaos cannot be overstated. It is breaking the uniformity of the American family. We are no longer one nation under one set of rules. We are 50 different experiments in how a society should handle the end of a relationship. The 2026 data indicates that this geographic instability is making people more hesitant to move for work or lifestyle reasons, fearing that a change in zip code could jeopardize their future financial security. The divorce court is now dictating the internal migration patterns of the United States. As we look at the map of the U.S. in 2026, we see a country that is legally uncoupling from itself. But as the states move apart in their interpretation of family law, a new question emerges. What happens to the children caught between these jurisdictions? How does a 2026 custody battle work when one parent lives in a shared parenting state and the other lives in a state that still favors primary custody? The interstate battle for the next generation is the most high-stakes conflict in current U.S. history. In Part 9, we are going to look at the custody wars of 2026, how the legal definition of parental fitness is being rewritten by the latest psychological trends, and why the best interests of the child standard has become the most contested phrase in American law. We will examine the data on relocation litigation and the rise of virtual visitation. The battle for the kids is moving from the playground to the digital frontier, and the rules have completely changed. The digital frontier of 2026 has transformed the most emotional cornerstone of the American legal system: child custody. Historically, the best interests of the child was a standard based on physical presence, stable school districts, and the proximity of extended family. In the current demographic landscape of the United States, that standard is being shredded by the reality of the remote work era and the hypermobility of the U.S. labor market. We are witnessing the rise of the cloud custody model, where the battle for the next generation is fought across time zones rather than neighborhoods. Imagine a character named Jennifer, a 34-year-old cybersecurity analyst living in Denver, Colorado. In early 2026, Jennifer is offered a high-level executive role in Washington, D.C. a move that would double her income and place her in a top-tier professional demographic. However, she shares 50-50 custody of her 7-year-old son with her former spouse, who remains in Colorado. In 1990, the potential outcome of this scenario was almost certainly a denial of the relocation request. The courts prioritized physical continuity above all else. But in 2026, we are seeing a historical trend where the definition of continuity is being digitized. This leads us to the explosive rise of relocation litigation. Step by step, the 2026 legal argument for moving a child across state lines has shifted from necessity to opportunity. Attorneys are now arguing that a child's best interests are served by the increased economic resources provided by a parent's career advancement, even if it means sacrificing physical days with the other parent. To bridge this gap, the U.S. court system is increasingly mandating virtual visitation. This isn't just a simple video call. In 2026, the demographic of tech-integrated families is using high-fidelity immersive platforms to maintain the parental bond. Imagine if Jennifer doesn't just call her son. She enters a shared digital environment where they can build virtual structures, attend remote classes together, and interact in a three-dimensional space. The data shows that 2026 is the year where digital proximity began to hold legal weight comparable to physical proximity. However, this creates a new demographic divide: the technology gap in custody. For high-income parents, virtual visitation is a seamless, immersive experience that preserves the relationship. For lower-income parents who lack high-speed infrastructure or expensive hardware, the move of a child across the country is functionally a permanent separation. This is the now trend in U.S. history, a two-tiered system of parenting where the wealthy can maintain a presence in their children's lives from 2,000 miles away, while the working class is effectively erased by geography. Furthermore, we must examine the parental fitness algorithm of 2026. As we discussed in Part 4, big data is now a primary witness in custody battles. But the demographic impact is getting more granular. We are seeing case studies where the screen time of a parent or the educational value of the digital content they provide for their child is used as a proxy for parental competence. Imagine if a father's custody time is reduced because his digital footprint shows a preference for low-engagement entertainment, while the mother's footprint shows a commitment to STEM-based interactive learning. This is the professionalization of parenting. In the 2026 U.S. court system, you aren't just being judged on whether you feed and clothe your child, you are being judged on your ability to optimize their developmental data points. Historical trends also reveal a massive shift in the demographic of the third parent, the digital device. In 2026, many custody orders now include device access clauses. These are legally binding agreements that govern when a child can be contacted, what filters must be in place, and who owns the data generated by the child's online activity. We are seeing a surge in litigation over digital kidnapping, where one parent blocks the other's access to the child's social accounts or gaming profiles. The demographic of the digital native child is now caught in a tug-of-war over their online identity, with courts struggling to define where a child's privacy begins and a parent's right to monitor ends. Step by step, the 2026 custody battle has also been impacted by the rise of the non-biological parent. Because the demographic of the American family has become so fragmented, we are seeing more cases involving step-parents, platonic co-parents, and even multi-generational caregivers who are demanding de facto parent status. In states like Oregon and California, the law has moved toward recognizing 3 or more legal parents. This is a radical historical pivot. It reflects a demographic reality where the biological nuclear unit is no longer the sole source of stability for a child. However, more parents mean more potential for conflict. We are seeing custody triangles, where 3 adults are fighting over a single schedule, leading to legal fees that are tripling compared to the traditional 2-party split. Consider the case study of a family in Michigan where a biological mother, a biological father, and a long-term domestic partner all have equal legal standing. In 2026, this creates a demographic of collaborative households that function like a board of directors for the child. While this can provide a wider safety net, the data suggests it also leads to a higher rate of secondary litigation. Small claims court battles over everything from summer camp choices to dietary restrictions. The American child of 2026 is increasingly being raised by a committee, not a couple. This leads to the nesting trend, a demographic movement where the children stay in the family home, and the parents rotate in and out according to the custody schedule. While historically rare in 2026, This has become a popular potential outcome for the upper middle class. Why? Because the housing market is so expensive that maintaining two separate, child-appropriate homes is financially impossible for many. Nesting allows the parents to share the cost of the prime residence, while they individually cycle through smaller, cheaper studio apartments on their off weeks. It is a demographic of rotating adults, a step-by-step survival strategy for the 2026 economy that keeps the children's lives stable, while the parents' lives remain in constant flux. The historical data from 2026 shows that we are raising a generation of children who view home as a fluid concept. They are the first demographic to grow up with legalized fluidity, the understanding that their family structure is a contract that can be renegotiated every 2 years based on the latest data. This is creating a psychological profile of a generation that is incredibly resilient and tech-savvy, but also deeply skeptical of long-term stability. They are the children of the algorithm, and their demographic influence on the US will be felt for the next century. But as the battle for the kids moves into the digital frontier, and the legal definitions of parenting expand, we have to look at the final piece of the puzzle. What is the ultimate endgame for the American family? If we have digitized the bond, fragmented the household, and automated the legal process, what remains of the original institution? We are standing on the precipice of a post-institutional America. In our final part, Part 10, we are going to look at the grand synthesis, the 2026 prediction for the next 50 years of U.S. family history. We will reveal the anti-divorce movement that is secretly gaining ground among Gen Alpha, the rise of the covenant marriage as a counterculture status symbol, and the one demographic statistic that proves the American family isn't actually dying. It is just becoming something we no longer recognize. The conclusion to this deep dive will change the way you look at your own front door. The American family in 2026 is not experiencing a slow death. It is undergoing a violent, high-speed metamorphosis. If you look at the raw data from the last 12 months, you might see the declining marriage rates and the volatile divorce statistics as a sign of cultural collapse. But when we look at the demographic undercurrents of the mid-2020s, a different picture emerges. We are moving toward a grand synthesis, where the traditional family model is being replaced by a highly resilient, data-driven, and hyper-intentional social structure. The demographic statistic that proves the American family is surviving is the massive surge in multi-generational cohabitation and the rise of the intentional kinship group. Imagine a character named Marcus, a 28-year-old living in a high-density urban center in 2026. Marcus is part of Gen Alpha, a generation that grew up watching the algorithmic dismantling of their parents' relationships. In the historical trends of the early 2000s, Marcus would have been a prime candidate for the permanent single demographic. However, the data for 2026 shows a shocking pivot: the anti-divorce movement. This isn't a religious revival. It is a pragmatic, survivalist response to the economic and psychological costs of uncoupling. Marcus and his peers are increasingly entering into covenant marriages, a legal structure in certain states that requires premarital counseling and makes divorce significantly more difficult to obtain. For this demographic, the difficulty is the point. They are seeking to build a fortress around their assets and their children that a simple change of heart cannot penetrate. Step by step, the 2026 landscape is being defined by this counterculture status symbol. In a world where everything is liquid and transactional, a permanent, difficult-to-break contract has become the ultimate luxury. We are seeing case studies where young couples are prioritizing longevity clauses over exit clauses. They are using private contracts to create their own version of the traditional family, one that exists outside the standard 50-50 community property models that dominated the last 50 years. This is the synthesis of old-world stability and new-world legal engineering. The historical trend of the next 50 years will likely be defined by the reaggregation of the American household. In 2026, the census is showing that the average number of adults per household is rising for the first time in a century. This isn't just about young adults moving back with parents. It is about compound families. Imagine if Marcus doesn't just live with a spouse, but with a sister, a brother-in-law, and a long-term platonic partner. This mega household demographic is the 2026 answer to the divorce economy. By pooling resources, they insulate themselves against the financial shocks that would normally trigger a divorce filing. In this model, if one couple splits, the household infrastructure remains intact. The home is no longer a fragile unit of two. It is a robust corporation of many. But what does this mean for the potential outcomes of the U.S. economy? We are moving toward a society where wealth is no longer concentrated in individual nuclear units, but in these trust-based clusters. The demographic data suggests that by the 2040s, the primary unit of American political and economic power will be these clusters. This will lead to a total reevaluation of the tax code and inheritance laws. We will see the rise of succession planning for households, where the goal is to keep the property and the capital within the group regardless of romantic shifts. The divorce court of the future will look less like a family dispute and more like a corporate divestiture. Consider the role of the social credit system in this new reality. In 2026, your stability score is becoming a factor in your ability to access high-level credit and insurance. If you are part of a stable long-term cluster, your risk profile is lower. This is creating a powerful demographic incentive to stay together. We are moving away from a world where the state incentivizes marriage through tax breaks, toward a world where the market incentivizes stability through lower costs of living. This is the marketization of the family. It is a world where being uncoupled is not just a personal choice but a massive financial liability that few can afford. The historical impact of this synthesis will be a radical cooling of the divorce wars. As families become more complex and integrated, the scorched earth tactics of 20th century divorce become impossible. You cannot burn down the house if your entire extended network is living in the other wing. We are seeing a demographic shift toward partial uncoupling, where a romantic relationship ends but the economic and residential partnership continues. This is the now trend in U.S. history, the death of the clean break. In 2026, everything is connected, and nothing is ever truly over. Furthermore, we must address the psychological evolution of the American public. The trauma of the great decoupling of the 2010s and 2020s has produced a demographic that is hyper-aware of the fragility of bonds. This has led to the intentionality era. People are no longer sliding into marriage or parenting by default. Every step is a calculated data point. We are seeing a surge in marital audits, where couples use AI-driven tools to assess the health of their partnership every 6 months, making micro-adjustments to their communication and finances to prevent a catastrophic failure. This is the predictive maintenance of the human heart. The 2026 data proves that the American family is not dying. It is being upgraded. It is becoming a high-performance, resilient, and deeply complex system, designed to survive a high-volatility world. The white picket fence has been replaced by a smart security perimeter, and the till death do us part vow has been replaced by a 100-page operating agreement. It may not look like the family of 1950, but it is exactly the family that 2026 requires. As you look at your own front door tonight, realize that you are not just entering a house, you are entering a demographic laboratory. The choices you make about who you live with, how you share your money, and how you document your relationships are the raw data for the next century of American history. You are the architect of the new American family. The statistics we have explored over these 10 parts are not your destiny. They are the terrain you must navigate. The story of divorce in U.S. history is ultimately a story of freedom, the freedom to leave, the freedom to start over, and now the freedom to redefine what staying together looks like. We have moved from the required marriage to the optional marriage to the strategic partnership. What comes next depends on how we value the one thing that an algorithm can never truly replace: the human need for a witness to our lives. The deep dive is over, but the evolution of your household is just beginning. In a world of shifting demographics and digital mirrors, the most valuable asset you own isn't your house or your Bitcoin. It is the quality of the people who stand in the room when the lights go out. The data is clear, but the future is still personal. What happens when the first algorithm-proof generation takes power in the 2030s? How will they rewrite the laws of the land to protect their new, complex families? And will the U.S. ever return to a singular, national model of the home? Or is the fragmentation of the state our permanent reality? The answers are already being written in the courtrooms of today.